Hello and welcome to the Human Frequency. It just occurred to me this morning that 20 years ago, I never thought that I would be sitting in a cabin in rural California talking about energy weapons. Yet, here I am.
Well, yes, this is a very strange time we live in, and we talk about energy weapons all the time. But since it's 9/11, we have to remember now, 20 years later, the single greatest assault on humanity that we've ever witnessed. It was done by an energy weapon 20 years ago, and it awoke the whole world not to the actual war going on, but that something wasn't right. And we're here to talk about the actual war that's going on, because there's been nothing but just conspiracy theories and speculation about 9/11 for...
And disinfo, lots and lots of disinfo on all sides of it. And when it happened, I was 16 years old, so I didn't know the first thing about anything. But our work with Orgon Energy, I think, gave us, and still gives us to this day, a unique perspective on what's going on here, and some special insight into the actual physics of the event. What not so much about what took place, but the fact that we know that certain things can't be true that we're told. So again, it's another one of those things where we almost know more about what didn't happen than what did.
But Dr. Judy Wood knows what happened, and I'm going to be reading a few things from her book. But really, if you want to know what she discovered about 9/11, we did an interview with David Weiss 5 years ago. It's posted from last summer on this channel. You only have to go back a year because we had to repost it, because 4 years after the fact, the YouTube just pulled it for I don't know why. So we have that episode where we interviewed David Weiss for 2 hours. So if you want to know about exactly the ins and outs of the energy weapon that was used, he explains it very well. And really, there's so many theories about 9/11, but they're diversions. So anyway, what happened that day was not thermite. It was not controlled demolition, and Dr. Judy Wood completely proves it, that it was done by something that we don't quite understand. And I will talk about a few of the things that she found, because it's mind-blowing.
But let's get right into it. Here we are 20 years later. I think we can kind of give sort of a progress report on how humans are combating their parasitic oppressors. And I've looked at this from many different angles. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, not just in the days leading up to this 20th anniversary, but for the past number of years. And I have come up with my grade for humanity. I would give the humans a D-. Not a total fail. I think Orgonite is probably the only thing that prevents myself from assessing that grade, but as it is, I would say D-.
Well, I think the biggest problem is that people are constantly being diverted away from what's actually going on and the solution to it. And everything is energetic. Everything on Earth has a higher dimensional aspect that until you realize it, you're never going to get to the solution. And so that's why we gift Orgonite, because that does clear a lot of the mental chemtrail haze out of your brain. That's what it does. It clears the chemtrails out of your mind so that you could see clearly and better understand that the solution to everything is actually energetic.
And coincidentally enough, Orgonite gifting began right around the time that 9/11 took place. So that's an interesting coincidence to me. But you totally hit the nail right on the head. The people they do not have the discernment to understand when they're being diverted and distracted away from the thing that they should be looking at. And there's a million diversions. There's never any shortage, no matter whether you're looking at the mainstream or the alternative. They're there no matter what.
So a lot of the time what people say about 9/11 is that it was an inside job. But was 9/11 actually an inside job? It depends what you mean by inside. So what ended up happening that day was not anything that any of us humans could understand, and the media came up with a very cursory explanation, sort of like I call it, there's different levels to the controlled opposition and mainstream media mind control. It starts with the most basic, which is that it's the dumbest thing that they can come up with, and they put it on mainstream TV, and most people believe it. And when it comes to chemtrails, I don't like to call it chemtrails so much these days because we know that those trails are really not harmful. But when it comes to that issue, they just say, oh, it's just contrails. And most people believe that. They don't think twice. And with 9/11, oh, some planes flew into the building. They don't think twice. But within all those conspiracy theories, there are so many diversions. There's people who are making guesses, or they're also attributing effects as causes, again, like they do with the weather. So there was a cause to 9/11. There was a cause to those buildings turning to dust and vaporizing, basically. I mean, the debris, there wasn't even enough debris for it to be a controlled demolition. But there was a sequence to events there. I'm going to actually read.
Well, I just want to say real quick, this is an important thing to point out, is that Dr. Judy Wood was basically exiled from the 9/11 truth movement. They have shunned her, they have vilified her, they've had nothing but bad things to say about her. To me, that speaks volumes about what she talks about, and I think that certainly gives a lot of credibility to her, because the 9/11 truth movement, as we will discuss later, is part of that deeper level of disinfo and diversion, much in the same way that all the geoengineering shills are to that realm that 9/11 truth movement is
Yes.
to its field.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get to, and I think I could go roundabout forever on this because I have too many things to talk about. But yes, that's pretty much what it is that if you don't believe that planes flown by terrorists blew up these buildings, then they've got this whole other set of things for you to like get diverted with, like thermite, which Judy Wood thoroughly debunks, mini nukes, all these things, controlled demolition. I would like to just start with this very interesting chart. And I'm only going to go through a few of these things because it's just too much. And David Weiss did a better job than I can on this. But the first impact of WTC1, the duration of time for that impact was 12 seconds. The second impact on WTC2, the duration was 6 seconds. The collapse of the First World Trade Center building, 10 seconds, and the collapse of building 2, 8 seconds. How does a building over 100 stories tall collapse in 10 seconds? It was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. No model of controlled demolition can explain that, and that it fell on itself. That was one thing.
And so quickly.
The time frame was like, it was unreal. And I'm going to read also, this is a really disturbing thing that happened that day, is that many people jumped out of the building. And Dr. Judy Wood says the number of people that jumped, it was impossible that they all just decided to jump. And when she looked at the photographs, which is very hard to look at, but she said once she realized that these people are trying to tell us something. So all these people died horrifically, but we can learn from this. We can, I hope, never see something like this happen again.
And just before you say this, I really need to get this out into the open real quick. For all of the people out there who are talking about 9/11 and saying that it was a hoax and that nobody died are just simply incorrect. And the parasites, as you may know, feed on human suffering. And believe me, people died that day. Not in the way we're told, but people did die, and there was a lot of etheric feeding going on by the AI parasites, if you will.
Yes, and that's how a lot of these horrific things that happen, they're being done for them to feed. And that's what we're ultimately getting at here. I guess I feel compelled to give a few pieces of information on 9/11. The source is this book. Where is it? Okay. Where Did the Towers Go by Dr. Judy Wood. I just feel compelled to give some of this information. This is one of the best books I've ever read. It's completely changes your mind. It changes your life because it doesn't just teach you about 9/11. This isn't about patriotism and fighting terrorists and flag waving. This is about understanding a terrible scourge on this earth, and this is the parasites. I mean, she doesn't even tell you who does it. This is very important. She doesn't tell you who because she doesn't know. She tells you what happened, the evidence, and the evidence shows things that cannot be explained in any human terms, which is why I would like to introduce the idea that this could be done by extra dimensionals, not from this world. I don't even think Judy Wood thought of that, but it could be because this is beyond.
So, and this book is from 2006. by the way? Is that
I
correct?
think 2007.
2007.
Around that time.
In other words, it took her many years to compile all this information. It's very much in detail.
So, regarding those people that jumped out of the building, she says that it looked to her that they were thrown out of the building by an energetic force, that they didn't just jump. It's because they were propelled and seemed surprised to find themselves where they are. So she says about this one that's falling here, he is energetically flapping his arms as if to regain his balance, like a gymnast on a balance beam or a last resort attempt to fly. He did not expect to be here. Where did he come from, and why is he here? From the information, there's some figures in the book. You can look at the pictures if you see this book. I don't think it will show on the screen here, but he appears to be falling in front of the hole in WTC1. If he were jumping because of heat or smoke, he would not be flapping his arms so energetically. He doesn't look like someone who chose to jump. If he accidentally fell, why was he where he might fall? In short, he looks to me like someone who is energetically launched away from something horrific without a choice. So she's showing that they were literally launched out of the building. And also, she gives more statistics about the longest jump than anyone ever made.
From a standing point.
So saying that there's no way for a human being to have propelled themselves this far from the building just by jumping, that there was a force that pushed them out. So the world record for the standing broad jump, 11 feet 6 inches. So these people are much, much farther. They were being thrown from the building. There was also the matter of the people were suffering from some kind of heat or radiation, and this is not really discussed at all by anybody. I mean, a lot of the 9/11 truthers, the truth movement, they focus on this controlled demolition explosion idea, but we're seeing evidence that there was this heating effect too. So people were putting wet clothes on their heads in order to protect themselves from smoke, but it seemed to be having an effect of actually making it worse. And let me find this part here. Okay, so it seemed like it was actually making it worse for them, like the water was reacting with something. So what Judy Wood says about this: at this juncture, we must introduce a hypothesis in an attempt to explain this strange behavior. Consider what might be expected if some sort of energy field, such as a microwave field, had been affecting that area just inside the building. Such a field might be part of what comprises the active denial systems that are now being used for crowd control. It is equally possible that such a field was part of whatever was destroying the building. In either case, wet clothing intensifies the pain caused by such microwaves, as is acknowledged in an article about the ADS, which quotes, "Wet clothing might sound like a good defense, but tests showed that contact with damp cloth actually intensified the effects of the beam." So these are things we have to consider, and I do think it's very important that we consider a non-human source of this attack.
Certainly. And also to remember that people are not necessarily thinking clearly when something like this is going on. They're acting in a panic. They're doing the first thing that comes to mind. They're totally in survival mode. So yeah, a lot what you're saying makes sense, and the pictures that I have not actually read this book. I've looked at it, at little bits of it, but the facts and the figures are just the accumulation of which is absolutely outstanding, and the pictures, the detailed explanations in this book are just absolutely unbelievable, and it's a long book.
It's an amazing book.
Reminds me of The Creature from Jekyll Island,
which is also a great book.
600-something page book.
I do want to also, to go into the materials of the building a little, this is what I really want to talk about. We're seeing transmutation of materials. We're seeing strange things going on. To completely put to bed the thermite theory, and this is why Judy Wood's on the outs with the alternative media on this, she completely puts it to bed. Pretty much the buildings were made of the same material that would be that thermite is made out of. So I'll just read another couple of things from the book. A report has come out stating that thermitic material was found in the dust samples from Lower Manhattan after 9/11. The authors of the report did not say they found thermite, but only that they found thermitic material. What is thermitic material? Presumably the term refers to the ingredients of thermite, which is a substance made of aluminum powder and iron oxide, rust. The Twin Towers were steel structures with aluminum cladding. Steel is a term used for iron to which between 0.02 to 1.7% carbon has been added. Typical low-carbon steel contains 99% iron. We know that a large portion of the towers was turned to dust, and iron dust in atmospheric conditions will immediately rust. So it is natural and to be expected that materials the buildings were made of would be found in the nanodust of their remains. The surprising thing would be if the nanodust from the buildings did not contain thermitic material. And I also would just add that Judy Wood completely cracked me up here with an example. So to better understand why, just because this is again attributing an effect of something as the cause, it's saying that these materials, this found in the dust, caused the building to come down. No, the materials in the dust are part of the same thing that took the building down. So you have to go back for the cause. You can't use an effect as a cause. Mm-hmm. She says, the buildings were turned to dust, and therefore the dust would be expected to contain traces of all materials that were in the buildings. Finding traces of chocolate, sugar, and nano wheat flour in the dust would not prove that chocolate chip cookies turned the buildings to dust. That's all I want to share. She has a lot of food references in here. I think, and she's also a night owl. She says so. I think she's snacking a little bit.
Hulda Clark too.
Hitting the snacks a little. Hulda Clark hits the cheesecake.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty hard, in fact.
That was one of the things. The other thing that I will also mention is 7 blocks away, cars were being toasted. Some energy beam was toasting the cars, yet not burning trees. Paper wasn't burning, but the buildings were burning, but there was paper everywhere. There was something very strange going on. Something very strange.
Yeah, I see a lot of the images that are shown, I see a lot of comparisons between what I also saw from the 2017 fires in Napa County, specifically Santa Rosa, when we gifted Santa Rosa.
Oh yeah, the weird fires.
Saw a lot of images of cars just completely burned to a crisp, and right next to the car is a plastic trash receptacle that's virtually untouched, and right next to there is a tree virtually untouched. And then there's maybe a metal street sign or something, or a fire hydrant, something that's metal close by, and that's also just completely burned through.
Yeah, she has pictures of that too. You could see cars where on the same car it's burned to one spot and then it's like perfect right after that. Like there's a straight line and then it's fine. There's just a ton of pictures in this book about this, and there is stuff about the weird fires too. And that's what I was talking about, you know, it didn't make any sense. Why would the paper not burn? See, there was possibly something that was just like hitting a small area, you know, the holes. Is that what I'm saying? Holes in things too, like holes in metal, holes in buildings. There are all these anomalies. So I was going to read about the weird fires, but I actually would rather just, because really David Weiss covered this a lot more in depth than us. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was materials being shoved through other materials where they don't belong, things being fused together, melting in strange ways. These are all indicative of an energy beam. All of these things wouldn't happen if the building was just demolished.
A transmutation of materials.
Right.
And literally the molecular structures just being changed in such a fashion that, things become fused with other things that they have no business becoming fused with. So really just strange anomalies. And she points out so many of them.
So there's something that she talks about called the Hutchison effect. And this is where all of these anomalies happen. And the scientist John Hutchison, he did experiments where he would put different beams of energy. He says, I used a different combination of radio waves along with high threshold voltage and electrostatic operators. And I only knew that magnetic fields to steer the electromagnetic field around and to conform to certain patterns. Now, mind you, this is fairly accidental discovery I made, and I had a real problem trying to replicate it in the early years. And I didn't think it was important, but it leaked out into the scientific community, and they started coming down with other scientists, and they started asking for these demonstrations, which I did give. So what he produced by using these different energy fields was levitation of heavy objects, fusion of dissimilar materials, such as metal and wood. And these were the things that were seen on 9/11. And Judy Wood has pictures of that too. Mm-hmm. One thing going through another. It makes no sense at all. Anomalous melting of materials without burning adjacent material. like the toasted cars.
Or a wood beam just going through a steel panel.
Spontaneous fracturing of metals and sliding sideways, both temporary and permanent changing in crystalline structure and physical properties, literally the changing of one thing into another. All of this happened. All of this happened at 9/11. In addition, there was a fluctuation in the Earth's magnetic field that was measured 20 minutes before the first impact. We have to look at things beyond the physical to understand. The energetic war, this was the catalyst for a new phase of the energetic war. And on the surface, people didn't really understand that's what was happening. But the fact that Orgonite gifting started around that time, people really started to fight back energetically. It was a wake-up call for human consciousness.
The point is that we don't completely discount the theory that humans may have this technology, but we have to just kind of go with the evidence here and at least open our eyes and our minds to the possibility that extra-dimensional beings may be involved here, because we're talking about technologies that are so far beyond what we have even in this day and age, that we have to at least be receptive to this idea, because we're not going to get to the bottom of this otherwise.
Yeah. And in Desmond Leslie's book...
Yes, I'm going to share a little bit from Flying Saucers Have Landed by Desmond Leslie and George Adamski. This book was written in 1953, and he discusses in great detail etheric weapons. He has a little different way of saying it because this book was written 70 years ago, and obviously the understanding was a little bit primitive by today's comparison. But he talks about so many things. He talks about free energy technology in many different cultures around the world, but he specifically focuses on two. He focuses on Ireland and India. And he goes back many, many hundreds, I think even thousands of years. In India, he talks about vimanas, which is what they call them, that flew just by sound. There was perpetual motion. It seemed to just move on etheric streams and didn't require any type of fuel or jet propulsion. It just moved about and could be stopped and started at will. It could move very fast. And he talks about weapons that certain beings had that were just incredibly destructive and seemed to just be limitless in their potential.
Yeah. It's interesting that this...
And also operated by sound frequency.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that in the folklore of ancient cultures, we do see these things. So what I'm saying is that although these energy weapons haven't been used for a long time on Earth, I mean, not in this destructive of a way, it's something that is not new to this Earth.
Yes.
Using sound frequency to move objects, there are theories that the pyramids were put together that way in Egypt, that there's no way that people could move these stones, or Stonehenge, all these things, their sound frequency could actually move things.
Yes, levitation of just immensely heavy, many hundreds of tons stones that just could not be done by conventional means. And speaking of conventional means, he also points out these enormous stone balls in Ireland and Scotland that have... He uses the term vitrified, which means that the surfaces of these rocks were melted by such heat that they became fused and had this glassy appearance. And we're talking about a temperature required to do this is not attainable by the use of conventional fires. So again, we're talking about technology that we don't have, or at least are not aware of, to produce these effects.
It sounds like this technology was once on Earth, though, and that's what's so amazing to me. Is I feel that life on this planet is in a very de-evolved state right now, consciously. But I think there was times.
But we can relearn these things in an instant. He mentions that the Wright brothers, it was 50 years ago at that time, they rediscovered But the point is,
Rediscovered flight.
yeah, they rediscovered flight. It had already been there, but we can relearn these things very quickly.
Right.
And lastly, I want to mention the very, very interesting thing is that he ties in these two separate cultures in India and Ireland thousands of years ago, when there was no known connection between the cultures, no trade or commerce between them, yet the mythology and folklore of one and the other were virtually identical. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting how that he was able to tie one in with the other.
So where do all these myths come from? And if they're so similar throughout the world, that would say that this free energy technology was known throughout the world at some point in time. And whether or not this is Earth people doing this to other Earth people or it's extra dimensionals, I tend to think it's more likely extra dimensionals that are doing these attacks on humanity. It's just really not about these bureaucratic governments that everybody's attributing so much power to. We're talking about something way, way beyond third dimensional capabilities. So if humans do have this technology, it was probably introduced to them by somebody who knows the technology, or it is, I think, more likely being done by the parasitic race that is sucking off of the life energy of this world, which is really what's going on here. And that is what 9/11 is. It's very important for us to remember that, what this is about and how we can stop this from ever happening again.
Yeah, if the U.S. government is the highest authority that there is in your mind, you're just not going to understand the energetic war. Conversely, if you know that the U.S. government is not the highest and final authority, then suddenly they don't seem so all-powerful and all-pervasive, and you were able to get, like you said, get to the bottom of the energetic war and understand this etheric feeding that's been going on for millennia. But I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from this book. I'm going to start with the Irish legend of Cuchulainn. That's Cuchulain. And he leads into this by saying, let me find my spot here. This is a hero of Irish mythology. Cuchulainn had weapons called the thunder feet of 100, of 500, or of 1,000. This means that the thunder feet could be adjusted to slay 100, 500, or 1,000 men as desired, all in one bang, and evidently relates to some form of explosive weapon with variable charges. This is very interesting, the adjustment. It's like they got a little dial on there. Okay, how many people are we going to kill now? So I know that's kind of a disturbing thought, but when you're working with these etheric energies, it's immense, the amount of power that can be channeled. It's like it's focusing its destructive energy into a single point.
That's right. It is. It's like a directed energy weapon. That's what Judy Wood said was used on 9/11, a directed energy weapon.
And then he talks about the stones right after. He says, consider for a moment that some of the prehistoric stone hill forts in Ireland and in West Scotland have their stones blasted and fused together as if by colossal heat. Talking about something that we can't get with conventional devices. And how this ties in with 9/11 is that we're seeing certain anomalies that cannot be explained away because they can't be done with conventional fires.
Right. It's all diversions. All of this stuff it's a 3D diversion. Everything they do, the parasites do with media and programming, is to keep us in lower dimensional consciousness. And when we can acknowledge what Judy Wood discovered here, this changes your life, because all of a sudden you realize that there are energies at work on this planet that we can't understand yet from higher dimensional consciousness. Now, I'm not saying it was used in a higher dimensional way. It was used in a really destructive way. There are beings that are a little bit higher than us, but not high. And they only stay a little higher than us just by keeping us down. It's like they're very close, and we can totally squash them at this point and expel them. That's what Orgonite is for.
Now, for the people out there that are religious adherents to the doctrine of mainstream science, there's an interesting little excerpt I wanted to read shortly thereafter. He says, I have said before, and will now say again at the risk of causing boredom, that no true magician believes in magic. There is no such thing. What is superstitiously called magic is in reality natural science, knowledge of the universal laws and their application, nothing more. The ancient magician controlled these laws largely by sound. The modern laboratory magician controls them largely through the use of heat, and he concentrates on different aspects. The ancient magician came to know them through the study and psychic intuition. The modern wizard obtains his knowledge through an intellectual process based on observations and mathematics. The results are similar. So, yeah, this is not some woo-woo New Age nonsense theory thing. This is actual science, but it's looking at science from a different perspective and seeing new things as a result. Because when you look at anything with blinders on, you're just going to see what you want to see. You're not going to see the infinite varieties that exist within any given thing. And I think at least that's what he's talking about. And he's talking about it in 1953, by the way.
This stuff has been known for a long time. This is the most suppressed thing on earth, is anything regarding free energy, whether it's involved with weapons or electricity or anything, because we get to a higher consciousness through free energy. That's the best way I can put it. It's not just about its applications and how we can use it. When we understand free energy, we can work in harmony with the energy of the universe, and everything comes more naturally, everything comes more easily. That's how the masters of India were able to manifest food. And when Jesus would change something into something else, if you could change water into wine or produce loaves and fishes out of just one loaf and fish, it's about achieving a higher level of consciousness to where you can pull things out of the invisible into the visible, taking from a higher dimension, lowering the vibration to the third dimension with your mind. This is also how the masters traveled great distances.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to say something if you didn't, but the problem here is that the indoctrinated religious people will say that that's blasphemy. You can't do that. No, you absolutely can if you are living in harmony with God's law. All of these things suddenly open up for you. That's what ascending to a higher dimensional state is all about. It's all about a state. It's a state of mind. It's not this rigid physical 3D thing that mainstream science tells us in order to, surprise, surprise, keep us with our blinders on, unable to see the infinite variety going on all around us.
When beings use the free energy as a weapon as opposed to as a beneficial thing, that is only possible if our consciousness is low. In a high consciousness environment, it's not possible to misuse it. It's only using us because our consciousness is so twisted and perverted and placed in the lowest place that we can. I mean, we're almost down in the 2D now. It's so bad. So the only way that this type of misuse of the universal cosmic energy is possible is through our own low consciousness.
Yes, being out of balance.
If we are of a higher consciousness level, they can't even do it. It wouldn't be ineffective.
More on that later.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the Star Trek weapon. It's a telepathic weapon. But I'm going to read a little bit longer part here where he talks about many, like a dozen different versions of etheric weapons that existed in these historic cultures. And he starts with a mention, I'm just going to give a little background of this, of an inventor from I believe the late 1800s, early 1900s, called John Keeley. He developed a way to levitate objects just by playing a note on a violin. And of course he was ridiculed by other scientists and castigated and all sorts of stuff. He died in poverty. This is a very sad story. But he says, once again, I feel a connection between Keely's engine, the Cars Celestial levitation plates operated by a song, the Hindu engine plans seen by Churchward, the Mercury engines in the Samar Celtic iron steeds which obeyed words of command, and the tremendous objects seen daily in our skies. He's talking about the crafts, what he called flying saucers, traveling silently or musically, at great speeds. So it's too much to get into a background on this, but he's listing so many of these things, and they all have similarities to each other, similar attributes. And a connection also, I see, between Indra's circled bow, Capilla's eye, Baelor's eye, Mashmak, and the hill forts of West Scotland and Ireland, whose stones are fused and vitrified into melted lumps. And a connection between armies who swooned at Cuchulain's weapons, the Indian Avidyastra, the missile of illusionary powers, the Prasvapana, the missile producing sleep, the arrow of sleep, and the 4 weapons controlled by sound, and the modern experiments in supersonics that have, so far, caused materials to ignite, metals to change their molecule, and houses to move off their foundations. This sounds suspiciously similar to what we saw on 9/11. The crazy anomalies in the actual structure of these buildings, things changing molecularly from one substance to another, stuff fused together that shouldn't be fused together, things that were completely burned as though a fire had been going in them all day, and right next to it, something left virtually untouched.
And the flipped over cars.
And
the houses being blown off their foundation is like the flipped over cars. We are seeing so much evidence. I mean, Dr. Judy Wood pretty much proved that an energy weapon was used. Now, one thing she says about that, though, I do want to share. Can I share one more thing that Judy Wood said? This is very important because this is why her work is criticized. And I just need to find where she talks about this because it's very important that we understand why her work is criticized. Because she definitely found, I think I put a page about that. Okay, yeah. It's very interesting. She definitely found that was the cause, but she's not able to say exactly what, I can't find the exact page right now, but what she says is, I'll just give the gist of it. She says that she is criticized because she cannot give the name and serial number and say exactly what this weapon is. She can only just show with a mountain of evidence that it was not thermite, that it was not an explosion. I wanted to read to you exactly what she said, but that is the gist of it, was that she's criticized because she can't say what it is.
And she's criticized because in the dogmatic mainstream scientific community, a mountain of evidence isn't enough.
It's not enough. They want to know what's the name of this technology. Well, it's something that we don't know yet. She says that it relates to the Hutchison effect. So you could see that humans have produced experiments that show what is happening. But no, we don't know who the weapon is from and what they used.
I said something a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to say it again. Groupthink is not science. Science comes from the Latin word scientia, which means to know. So you either know something or you don't. And this is the sort of the quandary with mainstream science, is that they have to know something in a certain way. And if they don't know it in that way, then it either doesn't exist or they have to make something up. Okay. And unfortunately, they often make things up. So I'm going to close out here with just 2 very brief statements that I think are relevant. He says, all these little fragments have the same underlying idea, that there is, in the ether, untapped sources of perpetual power which our technologists had until recently overlooked in their preoccupation with other forms of energy. See, it's that blinder thing. People only see what they want to see.
They're looking for energy that you burn, like fossil fuels and coal and nuclear power. They're looking for that. They're not looking for something you could tap into and just grab from the atmosphere.
And lastly, I'm going to close with this one sentence. He says, what the gods do, man will always try to copy until he has learned and become a god himself. Now, we know that we can't become God. We can't even become a god, but we can become as a god. And that, I think, is what he's talking about. We always try and mimic. We see something that defies all explanation. We say, hey, how did that happen? How did you do that? And we have to try and bring it into our level of understanding. As soon as we try and do that, we're lost. Because we really know quite little. Well, and even Desmond Leslie 70 years ago knew that.
Mostly humans have used free energy. Well, what I think is that it's been completely suppressed by governments and other companies that stand to make a lot more money, with gas, cars, and that kind of thing. The obvious stuff. I think it's been suppressed like that, but it's also been suppressed for its higher dimensional reasons. And any time that it's been used on this planet by humans that want to be like God, it's been used for evil. So if humans did do 9/11, and Judy Wood doesn't acknowledge an ET possibility because she doesn't say anything she doesn't know. All that is in the book is what she knows. This is what happened. Everything in detail. Physically what happened, how it collapsed, what happened to the debris. Everything is measured with numbers. It's very mathematical. So she tells you what happened. She doesn't tell you who. But what I find interesting is I know, based on the conclusion of her book, that she's thinking that it is coming from Earth and not from space or somewhere else possibly. So I want to open up the possibility beyond that because we don't know. It could be from off of this world as well. Anytime humans have used this technology, though, it has been used like this for harm. And the most insidious example is a very small energy weapon everyone carries every day. It's not like 9/11. It's not going to kill you in an instant, but you're being slowly molded mentally, etherically, spiritually to the parasitic will when you carry the tracker that they give you, the smartphone. It's an energy device, weapon, tracking device, and it's being used against you, and you don't actually have to have one. You don't have to. It's not required.
No, and in fact, any emitter of electromagnetic fields or EMF is going to do that, but the cell phone is the main offender. And that's one that everyone carries. It affects everyone in all walks of life because now even kids have them. I remember when I was in high school, I think I saw a kid in senior year, I'm class of 03, I saw a kid in senior year with a cell phone one time. Now, they're everywhere. And especially now with this pandemic thing, everyone's got a tablet or some kind of device. And they're basically just hooked up to it. You can't see like a cable coming out of the brain and going into the device, but it's there. It's just invisible. And that's why we're doing this 20-year anniversary episode, because like you said, it's not about patriotism and firebombing terrorists and caves in the desert somewhere. This is about an invisible war, an insidious war that's going on.
And this was the wake-up call. 9/11 was the wake-up call. I mean, if you really look at it, and you don't just think about patriotism and your country and that these vague ideas of freedom that's associated with this and a war with some foreign country, if you don't think about it that way and just look at the facts, this was not done by a military. This was done by some force beyond human comprehension with weapons beyond our comprehension. And this is only possible in this world because we are of such a low consciousness. However, an event like this, you can use this as a catalyst to increase your consciousness. And what Judy Wood did with this book was she brought to light something that had been just shrouded in darkness and mystery and confusion. And by understanding what actually happened, now we can actually come up with a solution to never letting something like this happen to Earthlings again. That's what this teaches us, I think. This is something that we have to take and not just look at it as a tragedy, but get something from it to where we can protect ourselves in the future.
And certainly use it as an opportunity to rise above that low level that the parasitic AI is keeping us at.
They require us to be there.
Yeah, as long as we hold on to those etheric weapons that we all carry around, we might try, but we're not going to achieve our true potential. There will always be a barrier, some kind of limitation and it's different for different people. It's not a one size fits all thing, but it's going to keep us from getting to where we need to be. And we have to just be brave already and ditch the devices. I know it's hard, but we're not going to get to where we need to be without it. Mm-hmm. There's no shortcuts on this one, I'm sorry to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need to get out now. And this battle is all about the mind. It's all about raising consciousness. However, you are a three-dimensional being. I'm a three-dimensional being, and it's hard to just sit there and go Om, and all of a sudden, it doesn't work like that. I mean, we don't know what we're doing. So what I recommend is Orgonite. I recommend, first off, getting rid of the little energy weapons. It's just like a tether. It keeps you in an electric fence like cattle, an electromagnetic fence. It's just a tether keeping you there. You ditch that, but you have to make Orgonite too. You have to have something to boost your level. And the very act of making Orgonite is a consciousness increasing act. And gifting it especially so, it changes everything. It's an amazing experience for the consciousness. But since we are 3D, we have to do it in a 3D way. We're just not shamans. We've been so screwed up by poisons in the food and the water and the energy weapons against us that we can't just go Om and isn't it great? I'm in bliss all the time. Wow, I love life. Everything is bliss. It doesn't work that way.
No.
So make something physical, an Orgonite piece. Make an Orgonite piece, and that's a 3D thing that you're doing in the 3D that on the surface looks like you're just making a lump of plastic and metal and crystals. On a higher dimension, there's much more happening, and you will be brought into that as you go.
And gift a cell tower that's nearby you. The cell tower is also a 3D thing, but on a higher level, there's a battle going on there.
Yes.
And the Orgonite is so much more powerful than that cell tower. It will completely transform your neighborhood. I guarantee it.
What's that quote about those who dance?
Oh yeah, George Carlin, the late George Carlin, my favorite comedian, once said, "Those who dance are considered insane by those who can't hear the music." I hear the music. I know you hear the music.
Yes.
I know a lot of other people hear the music. And it's hard because a lot of people don't hear it, or they hear it and claim that they don't hear it. So there's a lot of denial going on now.
That's for sure.
But the music's there, and if you know it's there, you have an obligation to dance to it. It's a very fairly simple analogy, but
how about singing along?
Singing along is fine.
They say you're not allowed to sing anymore though, because that spreads COVID.
As long as you're in key.
Can't sing in church.
No,
absolutely not.
So I want to end with this thing I was talking about from the seventh and final season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. There was an episode, a 2-part episode called Gambit, and it has to do with an ancient Vulcan weapon that was lost. It was lost in time, and it turns out, I'm not going to give away any plot spoilers, or I'll do it
I think this is going to be a plot spoiler.
As minimally as possible, but so stop right now if you don't want to know.
Thank you for listening to the Human Frequency. See you next time.
This weapon is a telepathic weapon, but it only works on people who have aggressive thoughts or who are predisposed to violence or violent thoughts. And the Vulcans had no use for it because they adopted peace for thousands of years. So the weapon became lost in history, but these sort of rogue archaeologists were trying to track it down. And of course, they had very bad intentions going on in their heads, and they ended up being destroyed by it. But the team of the USS Enterprise that beamed down, they were unaffected once Picard told them to just empty your mind of all aggressive thought. Negative
thoughts, anger.
Yes.
Those kind of things.
All
violence.
All of the emotions that Dr. Emoto showed to turn the water make very, very bad, distorted and incoherent images in the water.
The water crystals.
The molecules.
Yeah.
And of course, Worf was down there, so he's kind of predisposed to being violent. But even he is able to do that, and the weapon doesn't harm him.
That's a big plot spoiler.
And they're all left unaffected by it. But it's a telepathic weapon. It's not like a firearm or a huge bomb. It's something that works on a much different and subtler level.
It was very interesting because the people who were getting the weapon, they were trying to steal the weapon, they didn't know that it only affected people with negative minds. Perhaps they assumed that everyone had negative minds like them. And that was a discovery they made. And I find that very interesting. And by the way, Worf does meditate a lot.
He does.
Yeah, and that does clear the mind and calm it. But you can't achieve what we're talking about if you have a smartphone. You just can't. I don't care how you rationalize it. You're not going to get there. It's a frequency fence. It's like an electric fence that holds in the cattle.
And George Carlin also said the Japanese are very into martial arts and spiritual disciplines. So when someone tells me that he's studying something with a Japanese name, I know that he is either embarking on a sacred quest or learning how to break someone's neck with 2 fingers.
So I guess that just means that the energy can be used for good or bad, to benefit or harm, and it's just about...
That's what I'm saying.
And also, the energy is much more powerful if it's being used harmoniously. Mm-hmm. And it loses power when it's used for evil. It can be used that way on ignorant people like us Earthlings that are low consciousness and don't see above it. We have to rise above that.
But the reason it loses power is because you're fighting the flow at that point. To do evil, to do the wrong thing, you're going against the flow. You're going against the will of the Creator. Whereas when you go with it, it's just... You're going with the flow. It's the easiest thing in the world. That's why Orgonite is so much more powerful than any of these DOR emitters. That's why one little puck can neutralize several towers.
I think we might be asked this question by email, which is, so are you saying that gifting Orgonite would prevent another 9/11? I'm saying possibly.
It can't hurt.
Yeah, it could help. So I don't know. I can't tell you the answer on that. There's no way to know. Because if it did stop it, how would we know it? What would have happened if we didn't? The point is to increase the consciousness and vibration of the earth with gifting.
And the more we do that, the less the propaganda has any effect. If people started gifting Orgonite on a massive scale, oh my God, the COVID propaganda would just totally fall flat.
It's true. I mean, that's such an obvious lie. It's crazy what an obvious lie that was. And 9/11 was also an obvious lie, but a much more shocking way of doing it. This was a crazy thing to happen. I think this was part of the timeline of the Earth. It had to go that way. They knew when they built the towers they were going to come down, but I know that God also knew when they built the towers they would come down. And perhaps there's something symbolic of the takedown of these 2 towers in the future ascension of the human race. I don't know. But we do know it's important enough because we're still talking about it 20 years later, and we need to talk about it because it was a tragedy, and I give my prayers to everyone who lost someone that day, and my prayers for everyone who was lost that day, because we've never seen anything like this, and it is my hope that their deaths are not in vain and that we can learn from it.
Certainly. And also anyone that was injured. I have a cousin who has severe lung problems now because of it. It in fact has lung cancer. So there were a lot of people affected by this. As I said towards the beginning, people did die. People were harmed. There was a lot of etheric feeding going on that day. It was not a hoax, not by any stretch. But we were told a lie about why it happened, how it happened, and so many other things. And it's up to us to use our discernment and wade through it all and find out the solutions. And I think Judy Wood's book is, from what I've read of it, pretty damn convincing.
It's an unbelievable book. It is truly one of the greatest books I've ever read. A mind-changing, life-changing experience. Because this is not just about a historic tragedy that we're commemorating. This is about what can we do as a human race to recognize what's actually going on here, open our eyes to the possibilities of things we didn't understand, and finally defeat this parasitic force on the earth. So I thank you for joining us on our commemorative episode for 9/11, 20 years later. It's a very hard thing to talk about, actually, and I wanted to focus more on the energy involved so that we can move forward from it with a higher consciousness and some tools to solve this problem in the future. So
yes, and prevent it from ever happening again.
I do sense cataclysms coming. I don't think it's going to be quite like this. I do sense some pretty big events are going to be taking place on the earth coming up. So We hope that this helps you think about it a little more clearly, and then also that you will make or get some Orgonite for yourself, because it makes a huge difference in your home and environment. You can gift Tower Busters and see the consciousness of your community increase. We have a very concise tutorial video on the Orgone energy section of our website, thekembo.com. So please check it out, because everything on there about what's in Orgonite, how it works, it's all on that page. You can learn a ton. So thank you so much for listening. Our website again is thekembo.com. Please come and support our work if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again very soon.